are listening to a free version of Majority Report with Sam Steeder. To support the show and get another 15 minutes of daily program, go to majority.fm, please.
The Majority Report with Sam Steeder.
It is Thursday, October 3rd, 2019. My name is Sam Steeder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We're broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, columnist, New York Magazine intelligencer, Eric Levitz will be joining us. On the Warren-Sanders debate we need. Meanwhile, Donald Trump drags Mike Pence into the impeachment cauldron. And Pence's peeps claim he's just a patsy. The process worked as the whistleblower sought Schiff's Intel Committee advice on where to blow the whistle. And release the transcript gains traction as everyone is asking, how long is Trump's 18-and-a-half-minute gap? U.S. government to collect DNA from detained immigrants. IRS says it's easier to audit the poor, so that's what they'll do. Donald Trump wants to make asylum even harder for unaccompanied children. And Mike Pompeo destroying the State Department. All this and more on today's program. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We are a skeleton crew today. Matt and Brendan are in. Jamie is out on Thursdays. I'm usually out on Thursdays, but as you know, I took the day for Rosh Hashanah earlier in the week. And Michael is out celebrating his pipes, apparently. Not exactly sure. He celebrates Rosh Hashanah a couple days later, I guess. And but welcome. Hey, look, folks, I want to start off. I want to remind you, I have a request of you. And this is a serious one. The AM Quickie is now on its own feed. It will no longer be on the Majority Report audio feed as of tomorrow afternoon. So you have one more day to get on the AM Quickie feed. You can do this by going to iTunes and searching AM Quickie. Or you can do this by going to Stitcher and searching AM Quickie. Or you can simply go to AM Quickie, QUICKIE.com, amquickie.com. Subscribe, even if you, for some reason, don't want the most convenient digest of news headlines every morning when you're heading into work so that you have a vague notion of what's up, get a notion of what we're tracking, where we're going to go with the show on some level. Even if you don't want that all in less than 5 minutes, go and subscribe. It's helpful to us. It's helpful. This is a, we've had a couple of shows that we've tried to launch that haven't quite worked over the years. But this one, I think this one will. And so amquickie.com. Thank you for your attention. As you know, Bernie Sanders yesterday, it was announced that he had some blockage in some arteries, I guess, and went in, got a couple of stents. I think he's out of the hospital now. I don't know if he's been announced yet. They're probably keeping him in there to rest for another day. But this turns out to be a fairly typical thing. I guess I'm looking forward to mine. I've been reading about these things where sometimes they do preventative angioplasty that involves a catheter, like stuff I don't even want to think about. But I'm closer to that than I am further away from it, if you know what I'm saying. And but apparently, People are up and at 'em, working very quickly, and it's quite possible Bernie Sanders will have actually even more energy. Well, maybe we'll talk with Eric Levitz about this later, or maybe we'll talk about it tomorrow on the show as to what the implications will be on the race. But if anything, I think it's going to be problematic, believe it or not, for Joe Biden, because Bernie Sanders, I think he has the ability to come back in a week, 2 weeks, be as strong as ever. The problem is now that people are thinking like, hey, wait, what's going on with age? And why is Joe Biden can't string together a sentence? And why is he so lackluster? But who knows? Meanwhile, Sanders writes yesterday on Twitter, thanks for all the well wishes. I'm feeling good. I'm fortunate to have good health care and great doctors and nurses helping me to recover. None of us know when a medical emergency might affect us. No one should fear going bankrupt if it occurs. Medicare for all. Well, the Fox and Friends guys were very, very concerned about Bernie Sanders. And so they decided to bring Dr. Oz on. Now, Dr. Oz, is he a real doctor? I guess he must be, right?
Yeah.
And does he still have a show?
I think so,
Yes.
yeah. He got his medical license from the School of Oprah.
You got to see, he graduated from Oprah Medical School. And here's Dr. Oz, they bring it on. And gosh, don't you hate it when you bring a guest on and they say stuff you don't really want to talk about because it's completely inconsistent with the propaganda you've been pushing on your network for years. Well, Brian Kilmeade had one of those mornings.
Bernie sent out a tweet, I believe, overnight where he talked about thank you for the support. He's lucky he had good health care, and then made it a plug for Medicare for all.
Well, it does help that you have Medicare. I argued with Senator Sanders about more than Medicare for all, which is the programs he's offering. It's worth having that debate. I just want to make sure our candidates are healthy and where they need to be emotionally to do it. It does take a big burden off people's hearts. And actually, half of the doctors in America want Medicare for all.
Dr. Oz,
that's the crisis we have.
Right, that's a whole different conversation. But on Bernie Sanders specifically, if he's your patient and he's recovering well, when's he back on the stump going full bore, or is it a graduation?
Well, I think in about a week he can resume activities pretty aggressively, and maybe another week to get to full speed.
Yeah, there you go. Oh, I'm sorry. Medicare for wait, that's for another never day that we will have when we talk about half the doctors in America want Medicare for all.
Wait, so you're saying there's a 50-50 chance my doctor is a communist?
It's very possible. Either right now, as you know, you may not be aware of it, but you may have a socialist treating you, and then the other half. That doesn't mean the other half want absolutely no expansion of our health care as it is. 50% is probably not just a majority, or, I don't know if it's 50% or 49%, but I would bet it's a plurality of what doctors want in this country in terms of health care. And, make no mistake about it, it's going to be a long road to get there, regardless of who is elected president. And we will have more to say about that in just a moment when we talk to Eric Levitz about this Warren Sanders debate. I would recommend, and look, I should just say as a matter of housekeeping, today and tomorrow are going to be, in some respects, we're going to have a conversation from two different sides. Levitz writes at the end of his piece that I know some people are going to take this as an endorsement of Warren. That's not what it is. But I think, he comes out on balance. I think that there is probably a little bit more sense that the argument for Bernie in his mind is not as compelling as Bernie supporters think it is relative to Warren. I think that's a fair assessment. I think tomorrow, Virgil Texas will be on the program. We'll go over the news of the week, but we'll have a similar conversation. But I think on balance, he will go the other direction. So it should be interesting. And we will talk about that. But I just want to give people a heads up so that tomorrow they're not like, wait a second, this is almost the exact same conversation. It's going to be a similar conversation, but it's going to be from a slightly different perspective on both days. And let's do that now before we get into the impeachment, which is going to, I think, dominate the news when the Democrats start hitting the ground running. Today, Kurt Volker, who was a State Department representative in Ukraine, unpaid. My understanding he's unpaid, and I have seen nobody say, like, what's that about? There's so many people who are unpaid who have been involved in this controversy. Rudy Giuliani, unpaid. President Trump, supposedly unpaid. There's a lot of people going out there freelancing for no money.
Like the Tennessee Volunteers.
It's interesting, yeah. I wanted to model my entire administration based upon just charity. But we'll see. He's testifying, closed doors. Pretty soon the Democrats got to start opening the doors and bringing people in for public testimony. We'll also get to this story. Yesterday, I teased this thing that the Inspector General of the State Department was going to meet with lawmakers. Turns out the dude showed up with what looked like a 7th grader's, maybe 4th grader, who had put together a dossier that turns out to all been written by Rudy Giuliani. And the story behind that is also even more nuts. But there's a lot of insanity going on out there. And I've never been one who is like bought into the whole, like, they're just throwing stuff out there to distract you. But I actually think that's what's going on here. I think there, it's a combination of there's some crazy people and then there's some people who are crazy and cynical.
They need content.
Meanwhile, if you are headed to a country outside the United States and you're looking to try and create a false controversy, maybe from I don't know, intelligence services across the world, let's say you're Bill Barr, well, you're going to need to learn a new language rather quickly. Babbel is the language learning app that will get you speaking a new language quickly and with confidence. They're sponsoring the show today. You could choose from 14 different languages: Spanish, French, Italian, German, 10 others, and speak with confidence. Babbel's teaching method and speech recognition technology has been proven to be effective across multiple studies. It's designed to quickly get you speaking your new language within weeks. Babbel's lessons are lovingly created by over 100 language experts, real people, not by a translation machine. Lessons are engaging and convenient. They last only 10 to 15 minutes. Learn through interactive dialogue so you can perfect your pronunciation and accent. Babbel is available as an app, or you can just go online. Your progress will be synced across all your devices. So you can do it on your iPad, you can do it on your phone, you can do it on your computer, and it will keep track of where you are. Go out there, be bold, learn a new language with Babbel. Don't put this off. Now is the time to do this, folks. I mean, I keep telling myself that I'm going to learn Spanish, like every sort of like life milestone. When after I graduate college, when I go to college, now that I've quit this job, now that I stopped smoking, now that I started smoking, now that I quit smoking, now that I started smoking, I'm like, I'm going to learn a language. That's what I'm going to do. When I got separated, I thought that's when I'm going to learn a language. But now it's easier than ever. Babbel can help you do it. Here are the easy steps to speaking a new language with confidence. Go to Babbel.com or just download the app, select the language of your choice, and try it for free. That's Babbel, Babbel.com. Babbel, speak a new language with confidence. And one of today's sponsors is News Voice, which is the first ever entirely open, crowdsourced, democratized platform for news. And you can download the app for free at newsvoice.com/majority. Look, if you want, there's two ways basically I can give you to become a more savvy consumer of news. One is for you to just shadow me around and read what I read and read as many sources on any given story as you can. Or you could do it the easier way, because if you hang around with me, I'm going to force you to do stuff that you don't want to do. Or you can pick up News Voice at newsvoice.com/majority. This is where you get a sense of News Voice helps you keep track of basically all the slants on different stories. Like I say, it's a free, it's crowdsourced website, and you can create personalized news feeds and maintain a clear picture of where your news is coming from. So you can compare the story from the Post, the Times. You can compare the story from The Hill. A lot of garbage comes out of there. You can compare the story from Politico. Usually when we talk about a news story on the show, it comes from multiple different sources. You can look at foreign press. You can look at full-on ideological press. News Voice is fueled by its community of users. They contribute to the platform by fact-checking, submitting stories and sources that are missing, upvoting stories, and writing story summaries. You can also comment on stories and debate politics with other members of the community. And through staying active in the community, you can level up, earn perks on the platform. News Voice Play features let you listen to your personal news feed every day through customizable audio news playlists. It's your own personally tailored radio station for news. News Voice is a next-generation news aggregator and social media platform that values transparency, good journalism, and productive political discussions. Get totally free access by going to newsvoice.com/majority. I've put a link in the show notes for today, and I put a link underneath this on YouTube, newsvoice.com/majority. All right, quick break. Come back. Eric Levitz. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report on the phone. It is a pleasure to welcome back to the program, columnist for New York Magazine, The Intelligencer, Eric Levitz on the Bernie versus Warren debate we need. Eric, welcome back to the program.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, so let's start. Well, okay, let's even start before. Let's start like just even with your title. Why do we need this debate as opposed to which debate?
Yeah, so I guess, I mean, I'm not, 100% satisfied with my headline, but I would say that my view is that there's been a kind of tedious debate about, like, how much does Elizabeth Warren actually support the healthcare policies that she goes on live television and, says that she supports, even though there's a political cost to saying that she supports the abolition of health insurance, but and how much does she really mean it? As though the primary obstacle to passing Medicare for all in 2021 is going to be how badly the progressive president wants it, rather than the fact that there are, I believe 14 votes for Bernie's bill in the U.S. Senate right now. And if we stipulate that Elizabeth Warren doesn't actually support it, that's 13. And if we say the same about Kamala Harris, that's 12. And then the larger part of my argument is that, I guess part of the argument there is that if you have a really committed president, then they're going to be able to, rally the people to put pressure on all the Democratic senators and get everybody to support, single payer or every major item on the progressive agenda. In my view, is that is really not very closely examined, that theory of change, when you actually start to consider the fact that these senators have staggered 6-year terms, that because of the composition of the Senate, a lot of them represent areas that are more conservative than the average American voter. Just the fact that, the left has not proven that it can actually beat, even in a blue state, a deep blue state, moderate Democratic senators. They habitually win renomination. Every Democrat who opposes single payer won their nomination, who was on the ballot last year, without much trouble. Dianne Feinstein is still around.
All right. Let me. Maybe that was a little bit broad because I want to go through these step by step a little bit. But let's start. All right. First with the other premise that you have here, and that is that the American left's bark is louder than its bite, and just explain to us what that means. I mean, because I'm in sort of not quite ground zero, but we're in sort of quite ground zero on some level for the most vocal part of the left, right? I think the Jacobin offices are probably 5 minutes from here. So
yeah, and I would say that the volume of the bark is no small achievement. So basically, the argument is that the left has gained a lot of ideological influence and a lot of influence in the discourse, and a lot of influence over how elites think about politics, a lot of influence on, specifically Twitter and then in elite sort of policy debates. And there is, some real power in that. I attribute that to, on the one hand, the fact that just more center-right to center-left economics was kind of largely formulated in response, I think, to the, crisis of stagflation in the 1970s, when you have the problem of, high inflation. So we need to tamp down workers' bargaining power. Now we have the opposite problem that's really been revealed since the 2008 crisis, where we have a clear demand shortage, where ordinary workers do not have enough money. We have too much capital. We have too low inflation. And even just regular textbook economics would say that the left's answers are really kind of the solution here. And the problem is that, our political system is too beholden to the, interests who benefit from this totally dysfunctional economic arrangement. So it's partially that, and it's partially, the rise of left media and the rise of Bernie Sanders' campaign in 2016. But these things together have produced a situation where the left's ideas are taken really seriously and are fairly prominent in both, Democratic primary debates and in mainstream political coverage.
This is a really, I think, this is an important point to make, I think, for people, because just to stop and sort of make this assessment, I've been following politics professionally now for 15 years, and the move to the left in this country in terms of the debate has been incredibly pronounced. And I think a part of that is a function of all the things you just said, including the financial crisis, the Occupy Wall Street, and to a certain extent, Warren, I think was midwife to some of that as well. And then Bernie, made it explode. I mean, we can see the debates now where they are. But it's important to recognize, I think, as you're suggesting here, or not even suggesting, I think explicitly saying that part of that is because the ideas make a lot of sense right now, as opposed to there's just been an overwhelming, powerful force of people and populism that has basically forced people to take the knee. Right? It's the reason why the politics have moved this far left, to the extent that it has in this period of time, is a function of the ideas making a lot of sense and a significant shift in the population. But it's not just one of those things. Yeah.
I think it's, I say in the piece that American socialism is heavy on superstructure, light on base, that basically it isn't the case that 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 the people who are working on domestic policy at the Center for American Progress, the establishment Democratic think tank, they haven't moved sharply left because a mass movement has, arrayed itself outside their doors and intimidated it into endorsing sectoral bargaining and this and that. It's that the ideological climate has changed. And I think, we're in a situation right now where it's just objectively insane that when the United States can borrow money as cheaply as it can right now, when deficits are having so little impact on interest rates and inflation, and you have a giant climate crisis looming that anyone who can read the science understands that we need massive government action to do something about it. The left's idea is that, hey, why don't we, put people to work and have public work projects to invest in renewable energy? That makes a lot of sense. And when you have inequality as bad as it is, the idea of transferring wealth from the rich to the middle class and the poor makes a lot of sense. So just the objective conditions are such that any sort of self-respecting economist kind of has to be a little bit left-wing these days.
Right. That's in contrast to, we have 55% union density in this country, and the unions have decided we're going to do this, and so we do it. Right. I mean, that's the
exactly
that would be the counter the counter example, I guess. All right. So with that said, what's the relevance of that insight?
Yeah. So I think this can just obscure what the balance of forces actually are, in the respect that I was saying at the beginning of the conversation, that, if you just look on Twitter and look on elite discourse and look at what Democratic presidential candidates are saying at these debates, where suddenly the centrist position in the Democratic Party on health care is a public option so aggressive that it would threaten the long-term viability of private insurance. And the middle of the road climate plan is Joe Biden's $1.7 trillion net zero emissions by 2050. You would think that we're closer to achieving what we want to achieve than you are once you look at the existence of the Senate, look at the fact that we have a 10.5%, I believe, if I'm getting that correct, something in that range, union density rate, that basically, our media discourse also is kind of geared towards highly engaged Democratic voters, highly engaged young people, especially on Twitter, whereas our representative institutions like Congress are geared towards and overrepresent, older, more rural, more conservative elements of American society. And so there's just this disjunction. And it's unclear how far you can get on the strength of your ideas alone. And I think, I believe you've had David Dayen on recently about ways that if we can just get the executive in there, maybe there's certain things that you could do just through that. But to the extent that we need to get things through Congress, the fact that there is not a significant mobilized mass movement or labor movement that the left can marshal when, the Joe Manchins and John Testers of the world, say that they aren't comfortable with single payer or with, really, giving hell to the fossil fuel industry or what have you, that's going to be a problem. And we shouldn't let the influence that we have in these debates and in the discourse blind us to where the balance of forces really are.
Okay. And so let's I want to return back to that, because that really is the nub on some level. The argument, I think that I'll wait until we get there. But so let's just start with when we talk about Bernie and Warren and let's just start with those things that they can do unilaterally. Right. Where I mean, this is there are things that the president could do. We had Dayen on to talk about the day one agenda. There are those things. There's also foreign policy. You mentioned both. Like, give me your perspective on where they we're having a debate as to which is the better candidate for those who have, who are on the left, who are progressive or left of progressive or whatever it is. In terms of what they can do unilaterally, and then let's talk about the implications of what they would have to do legislatively when we talk about these sort of like big policies. Unilaterally, where do you see their strengths and weaknesses when you compare them?
Yeah, it's not entirely clear to me. I mean, part of my argument is that they're close enough ideologically that it's difficult to know. I think if you gave either one of them absolute power, I think that you would really see important distinctions between Sanders' relative skepticism towards market institutions and Warren's faith in them, this distinction between left liberalism and democratic socialism, maybe that would come to the fore. But I think that there's ambiguity as far as, the argument for Warren in terms of unilateral action is that she is she designed a government agency and got it off the ground and has a lot of bureaucratic expertise and a lot of expertise specifically with regard to financial regulation, where there are a lot of levers that a administration can pull. And she seems to be a pretty effective manager. So it's possible that she would be, maybe uniquely effective at implementing these forms of lawfare. On the other hand, the other point that I raise is that Bernie Sanders does seem to have, and his team seems to have a little bit of a more ambitious understanding of how they want to revise American foreign policy. The exact details from issue to issue, if you look at their separate answers to this 10-question questionnaire that the Council on Foreign Relations provided to all of the Democratic candidates, the differences between their answers are often very fine-grained. But there is definitely distinction on Israel-Palestine. Sanders is uniquely willing to say that he's going to condition military aid on an end to, Israeli settlement expansion and on constructive actions towards the two-state solution, whereas, Warren expresses concern for the settlements but doesn't bring up military aid. And their histories on the issue, Warren has generally been a pretty reliable vote for AIPAC on most things. I believe she signed a letter that discouraged the Obama administration from allowing this UN vote condemning Israeli settlements in the West Bank. So you see a distinction there. And there's also, Sanders has cultivated to a certain extent loose relations with progressive forces in other countries. He had this meeting with Yanis Varoufakis of this progressive international. Varoufakis is not a particularly powerful figure at this point, and I don't know exactly what the state of that international is. But you do see that Sanders' socialist ethos inclines him to a slightly more internationalist perspective in certain respects, although he also, when talking about trade, can get a little bit nationalist in terms of wanting to protect American workers from competing with the third world. But anyway, I think it's hard to game out exactly how in practice all this is going to would cash out. And, there's always, the President Bernie Sanders is going to have a lot of stuff on his plate. If he's really focused on trying to get his domestic agenda implemented, maybe he ends up ultimately outsourcing more of his foreign policy to the blob than we would want him to. Maybe not. But I think generally speaking, there's some basis for believing that Bernie would be better on foreign policy, and the president has a tremendous amount of authority there.
Right. Okay. And again, obviously these are broad strokes, and nobody can know, but that's why we talk about it. It's just to sort of to put it out there and make assessments in this way. All right. So if I understand your argument in regards to the chances of the policies being implemented that they're talking about that cannot be done through executive action. Now, I think one of the things that I took away from what they've done over at American Prospect with that day one agenda is that it's quite possible that the level of dedication to a certain policy outcome is highly relevant, particularly when you have this outline where you can see that, like, yeah, you can cancel student debt. You can make big strides in expansion of different healthcare initiatives. There's a whole litany of things, and I encourage people to go to the day one agenda. But it comes at a considerable political cost that if one is more dedicated to a certain outcome than another person, one might be able to risk. I don't know how we. I think people can make their own assessments about about that level of dedication, but in terms of the mechanics of it, that to me seems fairly straightforward. And tell me if you disagree. But if you don't, it seems to me that the rest of your argument, or at least in terms of getting policies implemented, is basically summed up in this analogy that, Bernie may be going 70 miles an hour. I mean, may be able to go 70 miles an hour. Warren may be able to go 60 miles an hour, and Biden can only go 30 miles an hour. But we're talking about a 50 mile per hour speed limit, right? And I mean, is that like the best way to sort of sum up at least the mechanical constraints you see on these two candidates as president?
Yeah, I think that's that's a fairly good analogy. I think that the point that you were describing to me, yeah, I mean, it illustrates that, it really does matter whether it's very clear to me, I think, that there are real stakes to it being Warren or Sanders versus Biden, which I know some people who are fairly progressive who I think at least before the publication of the day one agenda, we're like, well, they're all to the left of Joe Manchin, so what does it matter? Let's just, whoever, who cares? Right. But because of the level of executive authority that is available, we saw under Obama, how whether he was in a mood to push the limits of his office's power or not, was the difference between mass deportation and DACA. So there's real stakes there. To me, and I think that is a debate, a useful debate that we can have, is about really trying to dig into and pressure to see, get a better sense of what these two would do with their unilateral authority. My complaint was mostly with the focus on their disparate approaches to stuff that they would need to get through Congress, because I do think there really isn't much to talk about. But in terms of unilateral action, I think that there is. I just don't think it's obvious that Bernie would push harder than Warren, given, his sort of odd reluctance about saying that he would abolish the filibuster. I think he's been more disinclined to advocate for changing the Supreme Court. So Warren has been a little bit more willing to kind of norm break in terms of proceduralism. I don't know that that's significant, but I'm just saying that it just isn't totally unambiguous to me that Bernie is willing to stretch executive power more than Warren is. I believe that that's entirely possible, but it just seems like it's obvious to me that Warren and Bernie will use executive power for progressive purposes more aggressively than Joe Biden. It's not as clear to me, with the exception mentioned before of Israel-Palestine, certain aspects of foreign policy. In terms of domestic unilateral authority, it's not clear to me, but I'm open to the case. I just think that not enough debate has been focused on that.
Okay, and so returning back to fair enough. I mean, I think that's again, very hard to predict these things, all you're saying is not a slam dunk necessarily, and all right, so let's talk a little bit about this notion of you tackle the idea that Warren is somehow more friendly with the Democratic establishment than Sanders. I mean, she probably is insofar as she's a Democrat, and Sanders is not. But in terms of like sort of the you bring up the notion that she's been talking to superdelegates, and that Sanders' campaign has done is planning to do the same. But more broadly, let me ask you this: if it is the case, right, that 50 miles per hour is the speed limit, to use to really overuse my analogy, isn't there also, though, some value that is not addressed in that sort of longer term mission? Like, if the idea is that there is a structural cap on the amount of progressive change that we can get in terms of actual policy being implemented through a Senate where, guys like Chris Coons and Joe Manchin and the guy who's running in Arizona and and God willing, it's not Hickenlooper, but if it is, these people are going to be standing in the way of this stuff, and they're not going to be, they're going to be proud about it. They're going to go down, fighting against this. Isn't there also sort of the value in losing these fights in a dramatic fashion, and perhaps some smaller wins that will pay off 5-10 years down the road?
Well, so definitely see value in, the whole Overton window concept. So I think it absolutely makes sense to pressure, both candidates and pressure Warren where she is behind, the Sanders curve. I think that Bernie's labor plan was, pretty incredible and radical. And we've seen that after he released that, just today, Warren released a plan that very closely resembles it. Warren came out with the wealth tax earlier in the cycle, and Bernie came out with an even more aggressive and arguably better designed one. So I think that advocating for these big ideas and laying the groundwork for a future in which we have the power to implement them and changing the boundaries of the debate is all useful. So my critique there is just like with the frustration that, like on Medicare for All specifically, Warren is doing that Overton window work, whatever we want to argue about how long she's been committed to this or what's in her heart. She is like going on national television and making the case for why private insurance is just, a bunch of rentiers that we can just get rid of and, get all these efficiencies for single payer. So she's doing the Overton window shifting part. And if that's what's in, reach at this point, then I think that, it doesn't really matter what, she feels in her heart. And then I don't know about in terms of like losing fights once in power. I don't know. I mean, I think like if we have, it depends on what that means,
Well, let me give you an example. One of the things that I think many on the left, and not even the far left, I mean, on the left, take issue with Barack Obama's coming out with a $780 trillion stimulus, was that it set the predicate was set incorrectly. That he should have come out with $1 billion and maybe settled on 780 so that he had the political argument to make that, $1 trillion, that we needed $250 billion more to get out of this hole. Right. And that, I think, frankly, if he made that argument in 2009, 2010 may have worked out differently, but even if it didn't, I'm not convinced that Hillary Clinton wouldn't be president right now. If the argument was that the Republicans were standing in the way of that other $250 billion, even if he had no chance of getting it, there would have been an understanding that what happened was insufficient, and he would have had, and the Democrats would have had that political argument. And that is the value of losing in some instances in terms of politics while you're in office. That it's not even a question of the Overton window. It is a question of just sheer politics, putting the other side really firmly in defining the terms. And one of the things I think that Bernie does that some people perceive as a flaw, others as a strength, is really does create a certain binary quality to his proposals.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's a fair point. If we do posit that Warren would fold from the beginning once in power and introduce a public option rather than Medicare for all, and then begin by negotiating with herself, that would be probably less favorable than if Bernie did the opposite, and so maybe I think that's a big if, but I grant that point. If we do stipulate that, then it's possible that there would be a relevance to their personal commitments to the issue. I think at the same time, because of the lack of power that we actually have over most of these senators, and the fact that again, we don't have material power, we only have ideas. There is these other questions that I raised in the piece, which are not meant to be totally endorsed this perspective, but just they're kind of heretical thoughts that I don't think are engaged, that they need to be at least engaged to some extent. Which is thoughts like, is it actually possible that a candidate, a president that calls herself a capitalist will actually be able to get moderate Democratic senators to go along with things that are a bit more progressive than what they would let themselves sign on to if it was presented by a socialist with less close ties to their party, because they feel a stronger sense of needing to perform their independence from this radicalism that's coming from the White House. I don't know. And so that in relation to both the capitalist and socialist identification, and in relation to the fact that Warren, criticizes the Democratic establishment less than Bernie does, is a Democrat. You can make the argument, I'm not saying it's definitely correct, but that actually that such a figure that is, more connected to the establishment and frames herself in a slightly less radical way, actually in practice could get more progressive stuff through Congress. I don't know if that's true, but it seems to me that the connection there is as plausible as, the idea that starting from the most radical possible place will result in the most progressive possible legislation.
I mean, I think that's a reasonable argument to make. That sometimes it's if I don't have to swallow the ideological labels, I can just accept this as like it can seem more tame, even if it's the exact same policy. I think that's fair. But the flip side of that is that there's 14 senators who have signed on to Medicare for all. But if Bernie Sanders wins the presidency on Medicare for all, I have a feeling there's going to be a lot more senators who are going to be like, oh, wait a second, because self-preservation is also. Now, I don't know that you're going to get Joe Manchin. I don't know that you're going to get, these others. But you're certainly going to get a lot more of the Democrats who are going to say, like, this is the new normal. That's conceivable, too. I could see it going both ways, to be fair.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's going to be a little bit of that, but there's also going to be, when, I mean, I don't know if the stat is right, but when the lobbies for the industries that collectively make up 1/5 of our economy hit the airwaves with their ad campaigns, and everybody's doctors, not everybody, but, obviously there's some progressive doctors, but the doctors' lobbies are against even a public option. So when people's doctors tell them, hey, what's going on in Washington, they're trying to screw up this healthcare system, and stuff hits the airwaves, it's possible that you're going to see that movement reverse, but, impossible to know. But yeah, I just think that there's going to be a lot of challenges to Medicare for all. And if we're starting in a place where, 33 Democratic senators or Democratic-aligned senators don't feel the need to support it right now, didn't feel the need to support it last year, won re-election without supporting it. It's going to be tough.
All right. And lastly, you take on the argument that specifically one by Connor Kilpatrick and Bhaskar Sankara about the implication of Sanders winning would realign American politics by creating a sort of a new level of class consciousness. And just explain their argument and why you don't find that convincing.
Yeah, so their argument is that that basically there's severe limits on what the Democratic Party and what the left can accomplish until working class people are concentrated in one political party. Right now, we have this partisan polarization where really voters are polarized not along class lines so much as along culture war lines, along urban versus rural, and liberal versus conservative on these cultural immigration, diversity, et cetera. To get a party, to get a political formation coalition that's capable of implementing radical economic change, we need to have class be the dividing line in our politics, and Bernie's specific brand of politics is more conducive to that polarization, which is reflected in the fact that early polls suggest that his coalition in the primary, he draws more support from non-college educated voters and also has a more diverse coalition. So I find this unconvincing on a couple levels. One, if it were the case that one's support just among Democratic primary voters, the demographics of one's share of the Democratic primary vote was indicative of one's ability to, reassemble the New Deal coalition and radically change American politics, then we should all support Joe Biden because he has the most non-college educated voters, or that's the highest he has the highest percentage non-college educated support within his share of the vote. And second, because related to that, there's very good reason to think that this is just a reflection of name recognition, that college-educated voters pay closer attention to politics, especially early on in presidential cycles. And so the most famous names are getting more non-college support because if you don't follow politics closely and you haven't tuned in yet to the 2020 cycle, you're more likely to recognize Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders' names than you are Elizabeth Warren's. And we've seen evidence confirming that in recent weeks as Warren has become more prominent. Her base of support is steadily diversifying, and some recent polls have showed her beating Bernie with non-college educated whites. So there's that. Just is it the case that Bernie is attracting more support? I think that it's plausible that Bernie is a better candidate with non-college educated white voters, given how well he's performed with them in Vermont. And there's obviously it's a little different, but there's some overlap between secular non-college educated white voters in Vermont and in Wisconsin. There's some similarity there, so it's possible that he would be a better general election candidate. But I think what we're talking about there is an ability to, on the margin, get a little bit better with this constituency that's been trending right, not realign American politics. And my argument is that the latter is not going to happen in one election cycle, no matter who we nominate. When you look at the fact that this polarization of college and non-college educated, urban and rural, and along immigration and culture lines is not just happening in the United States, but is happening throughout Western Europe. And it seems like there's a decent amount of evidence that this is because non-college educated white voters have expressed conservative opinions on immigration pretty much forever. And as demographic change in all these Western countries has accelerated, that's, I think, brought immigration to the fore, made it more salient. Obviously, there were the failures of the third way social democratic parties as well. And I'm not saying that wasn't part of it, but you look at what happened in Britain when the Labour Party nominated Jeremy Corbyn, a democratic socialist, ran in the most left-wing platform that party had run on in a generation. And they gained a historic number of seats in the 2017 election, but largely by flipping districts that the Tories had held forever in the richest parts of London. because just the polarization right now is anti-Brexit voters wanted a left-wing party to vote for. Young people who are cosmopolitan are moving left, and even when that's maybe against their class interests, and they're supporting a Democrat, they're still willing to support a democratic socialist to stick it to those Brexiteers. So yeah, I just think that there's not much evidence that we're going to immediately change the valence of partisan politics in the U.S.
And in fact, you say by projecting contempt for one of the voting blocks that made these gains possible, and you're talking about those in the context of the British election, those wealthy areas, and I guess presumably like the professional class here, right? Is that what you mean by when you? I mean, you say that their argument, Sankaris and Kilpatrick's argument, project a little bit of contempt for those voters. Is that right? Am I reading that? Okay.
Yeah.
And you're saying, and asserting that existing Democratic Party can never govern, they risk projecting an air of indifference towards such reforms and the working class people who've benefited from them. And you say, in fairness, indifference that I know neither of these writers actually feels. So you're suggesting that the danger in rejecting a Democratic electorate that includes the professional class and is not defined by class interests is that it may, at least in the short run, hurt the people presumably that you want to protect.
Yeah, I think that there's a line in their piece that says that, without, winning back the white working class, we'll have a party that can win but never govern, in the sense that, reflecting what I was saying about the Senate, frankly, it is true that we need to win more white non-college voters. And also, the inability to control state legislatures in a lot of places. But I think that just my caution is that, if you suggest you're not going to win that many Democratic primaries if you suggest the Democratic Party isn't even governing at a time when in California, they just passed legislation to establish public banks to give health care to undocumented workers, got employment rights for Uber drivers. And, when for all the disappointments of the Obama era, we had a giant expansion of public health insurance to the working class that, by some estimates, has saved 20,000 working class Americans' lives and would have done more if we had taken power in more red states. So, these things are real. And, there's a risk of, socialists need to combat the impression that they care more about this abstract ideological goal than the concrete conditions of the people who they claim to champion. And so I think that you just need to be careful to not, I don't know. I just think if you want to win over the black working class, particularly those who currently vote, you can't, you don't want to understate what, Barack Obama did achieve, even while you're making the criticisms of the many, disappointing aspects of his tenure.
It's a fascinating argument. I want to encourage people to read it. Do you feel like that there's anything else that we left on the table?
No, I guess just the other thing I would say about that last point is just that when you look at public opinion polls, college-educated voters, it's also, very crude. What do we mean when we say professional middle class? Is that school teachers, or is that strictly, white-collar, white-shoe firm lawyers? But when you look at public opinion data, college-educated voters are often more left on some economic issues. Obviously, there's sort of a difference when the question is like really immediate and visceral and local, when it's a question of whether you're going to desegregate the school district that you belong to, or embrace zoning changes that might threaten the value of your property. Then class interests really do play into it. But federal policy questions are abstract enough that people often let ideology be their guide. And meanwhile, these voters are college-educated white voters specifically right now are across the board more progressive on a variety of very important issues of immigration and racial justice. And so, I don't think that we should not want their votes, because they are backstopping a decent amount of progressive change in the places where Democrats actually have power.
Eric Levitz, the piece is the Bernie versus Warren debate we need, asterisk, not 100% the one that you would call it, but that doesn't matter. That's the easiest way for people to find it, or they can go to majority.fm. We will put a link to the piece. Really smart piece. I really appreciate your coming on and talking to us about it.
Yep, thanks a lot.
All right, folks. There you have it. I think it's an interesting piece. I mean, it doesn't necessarily make an affirmative case for Warren, but it is it addresses at least some of the arguments in terms of the distinction. I obviously still feel that that even if we have that 50 mile per hour speed limit, the idea that the car can go faster and people are aware of it is important, has a lot of value. We used to talk about losing quite a bit back in the aughts, because that was really the only option we had. And it was just a question of how big of a fight you were going to make and how you were going to present that fight. And how well you were going to delineate the stark differences. But, I mean, I think I also agree with my own analogy that we're talking about 70 miles an hour, 50 miles an hour, and 30 miles an hour when we talk about Biden. So, but there you have it. Tomorrow we'll get, I think we're going to have a similar conversation on some level with Virgil, Texas, but maybe from sort of just a slightly other perspective. So it'll be interesting. I think it'll be interesting.
It's the idea marketplace, folks.
There you go. There you go. Folks, I also want to thank you for taking the time to watch the Crowder Cold Feet video that we have up.
Hashtag Cold Feet Crowder.
I know there's a lot of people who maybe we should get maybe we should respond to, he does that mug club thing?
Yeah.
Where he does take a picture of your mug, your Crowder mug.
And a cigar.
And a cigar. Maybe we should start doing, show a picture of your warm socks.
Of your cedar socks?
Of your cedar socks to provide.
Cedar stockings.
Crowder's
it's gonna
cold
be fall.
feet. Yeah, it's gonna be, it's gonna get colder and colder, those feet. And so maybe people might want to hashtag Cold Feet Crowder. Take a picture of your socks or somebody else's socks or slippers.
But definitely got to have something on those feet. We don't want to start.
Got to warm
No,
them
no,
up.
yeah, no. The idea, you don't even need to you take a picture of your feet. Take a picture of socks. Socks or something to warm up Steven Crowder's cold feet, and tag Steven just so that he knows that people care about that, about his feet.
Chronic condition.
Yep. No joke. That can be really rough if your feet are all constantly cold.
And then you put warm stockings on, they get sweaty.
Yeah.
You also can't do
It's
the
really
debate.
hard. It's tough. It's super tough. Folks, your support makes this show possible. You can support this program by becoming a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, we give you extra content every day. We give you the first half commercial free, and you keep this show trucking along. October's been just a crazy month. It's going to be a crazy month. We're doing a bunch of pre-tapes. We're because the Jewish holidays are come very late this year, and that bumps up against the Vegas trip, and one of them usually falls on the weekend, and it didn't this time. But still pumping out that content for you, and we are determined to be on top of impeachment and obviously the 2020 race, and to the extent that anything else happens, which I don't think they will, regarding our government. Although, the agencies are still being destroyed. there'll be stuff to talk about. More and more people are paying attention to the fact that between Rex Tillerson, who completely understaffed the State Department, and Mike Pompeo, who seems to be intimidating everyone, and they're using the State Department as basically an Oppo research outfit. This is stuff that is going to be a problem for this country for years to come. I mean, knock on wood, we get through this period without any major conflicts or any major screw-ups that are acute. And if we do, we are very fortunate to get through these 4 years. And knock on wood, it's only going to be 4. But the reality is that we have degraded the apparatus of the country, whether it's in terms of diplomacy between ourselves and other nations, or agencies such as the EPA, the Department of Education, the USDA, the Bureau of Land Management, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. They've all been degraded. They've been degraded in terms of the way they operate. They've been degraded in terms of the way that they attract good candidates to work there, and have jettisoned people who have been providing institutional memory for these places for in some instances, decades. And we're not going to fully understand the mess that exists there until, we start talking to people who enter into these agencies after these 4 years out. Go back and listen to Sam Bagenstos, who we interviewed, I'm guessing now it was in December of 2016. He had been at the Department of Justice with Clinton and then returned with Obama. And those 8 years of George Bush really did a number on the Department of Justice. I think Donald Trump is like dog years in terms of that. They have just allowed it. They have both frontally attacked these agencies and allowed them to sort of just become decrepit by something like 28 undersecretaries in the State Department who are acting or unfilled. It's nuts. Anyways, I guess that was I don't know why I even brought that up in the context of, but jointhemajority.report.com. Also, sign up for the AM Quickie. Do it right now. amquickie.com. amquickie.com. If you're listening to the sound of my voice on your phone, very easy to go to your podcast app and just search amquickie.com. Subscribe. If you're watching on the computer, go to amquickie.com. Subscribe. This is easy stuff. JustCoffee.coop. Fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority. Get 10% off. Check out the Michael Brooks Show. You can find it on his YouTube channel at TMBS or patreon.com/TMBS. Also, The Antifada. Find that at patreon.com/The Antifada. If you go to our majority.fm or look into the, you will find links to both of the live shows for TMBS and The Antifada. And Literary Hangover. Matt?
Yeah, up now on the YouTube is the new episode Hobbamock, A Tale of Early Times by Lydia Maria Child. It's sort of a anti-patriarchal leather stocking tales. So check that out.
Oh, there you go. Look at that. You have a visual to support your pitch. That's pretty fancy. See you in the fun half.
You are in for it.
All right, folks. 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you can imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just want to degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back. back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back, 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 back.
Almost says what?
The alpha males are back, 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 back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back, back, back.
I am a total cunt.
Can we bring back DJ Dannerky's song, please?
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Dannerky.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break for people.
That's fucking nonsense.
Hey, folks, reminder.
I do not have Parkinson's.
And the alpha males are...
Psych. Fuck them. Fuck them.
Almost says what?
Almost
says what?
Hell of a lot of bank. 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 Hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter. Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
The alpha males are back, 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 back. And the Africans are black, 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 black Africans. And the alpha males are back, 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 back. And the Africans are black, 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 black.
See Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keep it at 100. Can't knock the hustle. Come on! Fuck them. Fuck them. Fuck things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday! Happy birthday to me, Jew boy!
I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back, back. Africans are black, black. Alpha males are back, back. Africans are black, black.
Come on! Come on! Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total
Pussy.